Hi everyone, I'm Bunny and welcome to the first ever Otome Rambles. Today I'll be talking about the recently released Utakata no Uchronia. Before we begin, I'd like to give some short disclaimers, so feel free to pause the video to read them if you would like, and if not, let's get on to the video. After creating successful franchises such as Yunohana Spring and Piofiore under Otome, director Asahi Takamura and illustrator Riri, along with a few others, went on to form T's Creation in late 2022, and in collaboration with Broccoli created LicoBiTS, a video game brand targeted towards female audiences, while also announcing their first Otome endeavor, Utakata no Uchronia, which I'll be referring to as Uchronia from here on, featuring former colleague Ringo Kazura as a scenario writer. Uchronia was highly anticipated ever since its announcement in December of that year, even ranking #1 for the most anticipated 2024 title amongst Bizlog readers leading up to its release on April 11th, 2024. In its first week, it managed to sell more than 11,000 copies, topping the charts. All that is to say, this game has been on a lot of people's radars for a while, including mine, and I was so excited to finally play when my copy was released from Mail Hell. Set in a miniature garden that floats in the sky, the floating garden Itehari is a prosperous city known as a utopia. The main character, Hinagiku, who was born into a prestigious family and grew up without any inconvenience, longs for the outside world. One day, when the protagonist turns 18, she meets a young man, Yashiro, who has lost his memory, and gets involved in an incident containing the truth of this utopia hidden by her parents. What kind of love and truth will Hinagiku, who doesn't know anything about the outside world, discover in this fleeting, beautiful utopia? Uchronia was released on April 11, 2024 on the Nintendo Switch with a Sarah C rating, and as one can probably guess from the synopsis, it's a dystopian fantasy with mystery elements. Expect lots of politics, so if that isn't your thing, then most of this game's plot will most likely be a dud for you, unfortunately. The devs proposed 2 different route orders, which I kinda ended up following the latter just cause I wanted to play Tsukusa as late as possible, faves for last, teehee, and they go as followed. For plot progression, it's Tobari, Aiki, Tsukusa, Yori, Yashiro. For romance progression, it's Aiki, Tobari, Yori, Tsukusa, Yashiro. Okay, you're seeing all these names, but who the heck are these people? Well, first, let's talk about the world a bit more. Once upon a time, there was this sea-locked isolationist country named Toe that had constant floods, which ended up disproportionately affecting those on the fringes of its society. The emperor didn't really know what to do about it, but an outsider came along and was like, hey, here's this stuff to make some cool engines and gadgets and gizmos, and then Toe's emperor was like, thanks, and made Itehari, a floating island sustained by karakuri steam engines that were made from the materials provided by the outsider. Its populace were those the emperor struggled to protect, and its ruler, the outsider who saved them, who later became known as Taiju-sama. Even today, his descendants live on in Itehari, away from other members of society. In Itehari, the districts, numbered 1 through 32, divide the nobles and the commoners, and beneath the city's surface lies the Senka, where criminals are exiled to. And this has been going on for 300 years or so of kumbaya, peace and harmony for all. If there is one thing I think that is done very well in Uchronia, it's the world building. Though the game is confined to the small, isolated world of Itehari, it takes the player through everywhere this place has to offer, and does a fair job of introducing the plurality of experiences in this utopia. And while what we learn about the outside world is mostly through information relayed to us, I still found their methods of this mix of hopeful optimism and political propagandistic cynicism really interesting. However, while the limited scope of the world allows for thorough world building, it still holds Uchronia back in some ways. There are more than a couple instances where the cast has to re-solve mysteries we already know from a previous route, though there are usually twists to keep it interesting. In addition, while seeing the outside world through the eyes of our cast provided its own commentary, seeing more of the world could have allowed the player to make their own judgments. Finally, onto the besties, everybody. Hinagiku Togo, 18, noble girl, and literally built different. A headstrong, honest, and earnest girl, Hinagiku was raised by her servant and right-hand man, Aoyuki, more on him later, upon the deaths of her parents as a child. She is just, fair, and willing to gain new perspectives. But she's far from a picture-perfect noble lady. She tells her superiors when they got her messed up. She loves roaming around Itehari and getting herself into trouble. And for a lot of things, it's her way or the highway. Truth be told, she's pretty immature and starry-eyed. But most of all, she longs to experience the world beyond Itehari. Hinagiku's eccentric, loud, and lovable personality stole my heart the second I met her. She's an absolute go-getter, whether it comes to the plot or getting herself a man from time to time, and I love it. She refuses to let anything pass her by and basically grabs life by the balls. This girl is the hoot, the holler, and everything in between. I'd give my life to her. Hinagiku wishes he'd lay off just a tad, and he just wishes that she would stop bringing home stray birds, cats, and men.
元の場所に返してこい。先月は鳥、先週は猫、今日は人。何でもかんでも拾ってきて、面倒見るのはいつも俺じゃないか。
Having been by Hinagiku's side for as long as she can remember, Aoyuki, 26, and voiced by the man we can't escape, Saito-sama, is an incredibly competent servant and quasi-babysitter who declares himself a tool for Hinagiku to use as she wishes. To him, Hinagiku comes first and foremost, and that's relayed through his utmost commitment to her safety and happiness throughout the game. And while Hinagiku has met his wits' end from time to time, he most certainly has a soft spot for her. Part-time handyman, part-time shut-in, and full-time yearner, he's a childhood friend of our protagonist and totally wrapped around Hinagiku's finger, though the girl herself is none the wiser.
いやだから、あんたがヤシロのためにそこまでしてやる必要な。わかったよ。行こう。
At 18, Tsuyukusa, voiced by my goat Yoshitsuku Matsuoka, is the owner of Hangetsudo, a karakuri repair and general request shop located in Nakamachi. If there's one thing that he likes as much as he likes Hinagiku, it's karakuri, which entails technology now mostly unique to Itehari. Tsuyukusa is a very intelligent young man who dislikes dealing with others, but ends up having to anyway because of Hinagiku. The face card of the entertainment district, and even Hinagiku knows it. Despite his mature disposition, Tobari, voiced by the man we really can't escape, Nobuhiko Okamoto, is 21 years old and already the face, aka the leader of the entertainment district in Itehari, located in the more impoverished areas of the city, Hashimachi. In his downtime, you can find him working as the head of the Shiranui, a revolutionary troupe, and mayhaps eating a sweet or two. He may come off as crass in speech and conduct, but he's a very idealistic young man who hates to see anyone get hurt. Good face, but a bad personality. Yori Saiji, voiced by Takuya Aguchi, is 28, a nobleman and an officer of the Kurozuru, an organization founded to be Taiju-sama's bodyguards, preserve peace, and protect Itehari from foreign threats, though the general public don't look on them very kindly. Yori is a strong believer of the status quo, and holds a disdain for those beneath him. His words are sharp, and threats masked by a smile. Yori is definitely the kind of guy that would ruin your life just because he was bored. Lastly is just the guy.
俺はただの記憶喪失の一般人だよ。
After meeting and saving Hinagiku from a sticky situation, the 24-year-old amnesiac, Yashiro, voiced by Otome newcomer Chiaki Kobayashi, quickly becomes friends with the noble girl. A really nice guy, albeit a bit too honest and a little tactless. Though, there is something off about him. The common route is made up of a prologue and 2 relatively short chapters. A branch happens at Chapter 2, which puts you on the path for a different pair of LI routes. There is Chapter 2A, the Yashiro Truth branch, there's Chapter 2B, the Tobari Tsuyukusa branch, and lastly Chapter 2C, the Aoyuki Yori branch. Upon completing a route, the common route will have additional scenes. I really enjoyed the common route. I personally found it and its branches fun and short. Playing the common route in the trial version is what sold me on the game in the first place. In just a few hours, I had a clear idea of where the game could take us, the MC's personality, and some character dynamics amongst the cast. I will say though that not every ally is introduced in the common route, so in some routes you have to sit and act surprised when they dedicate scenes to reintroducing them, which I felt slowed down the momentum sometimes. Each route contains 7 chapters, which it then splits into a different chapter 8, the good or the bad end. There are some dead ends as well as a slightly longer non-CG mid-route bad end. There are 5 love interest routes and a truth route, and most of them are locked from the jump. You have to play Tobari to unlock Tsukusa, you have to play Aoyuki to unlock Yori, and you have to play all of the former to unlock Yashiro, and then play Yashiro to get to the truth route. There is also a short story available for each ally after unlocking their good end. I will be going through the routes in the order that I completed them. After witnessing an unbelievable incident and a string of many troubling Itehari, Hinagiku must do her part in finding out the who and why to it. Dangers abound, but at least Aoyuki is there by her side like he always has been and always will be, right? Despite Aoyuki being second for the plot order, I don't think you spoil much playing him first. Comparatively, Aoyuki's plot feels a bit less ambitious and pretty straightforward. It only briefly hints at some overarching plot points of the game to hone in on its semi-isolated mystery as expected of a starter route. But don't write him off just yet, since his story is well paced and the execution interesting. We're working with the Forbidden Love Master X Servant dynamic here, and it did not disappoint. I love the consistent reminders that loomed over Hinagiku and Aoyuki's heads that their love could not be, and how they each dealt with it differently. This makes for a route where Hinagiku, a woman of status and privilege, does a lot of the chasing. This mixed with some slow burn made it all the more satisfying when we got romantic moments. But Aoyuki's best end is mostly happy, and I have minimal complaints with the actual events that took place. I feel like everything wrapped up a bit too fast and a bit too vaguely for me to consider a definite conclusion. And an elephant in the room isn't totally resolved, at least to my standards, but I digress. FYI, the bad end spoils things for other routes, so if you do end up playing Aoyuki first, I'd wait to complete the bad end until after doing both of the 2 B-boys. As a byproduct of his surroundings and experiences, Aoyuki has long since resigned to a jaded defeatism and acceptance of his reality as a commoner, if that is what it takes to protect those he loves. Aoyuki is an incredibly thought-provoking character, with a backstory that strengthens the credibility of his love for Hinagiku and his character arc. Alongside Tobari, I think his route best balanced the plot and romance. After witnessing an act of arson, Hinagiku grasps at any lead she can find on the perpetrator. But is she really ready to play with fire? Considering Tobari's proximity to the diminished voices in Itehari as the face of the entertainment district, it is no surprise that this route most directly confronts the class stratification in Itehari. I felt like the plot weaved itself with its themes the best out of all the routes. With every plot and romantic development, our couple learned and acknowledged prejudices that not only their society carried, but they themselves did as well. Some developments you can see coming from the hints dropped throughout, but there are some aces hidden up the route's sleeve that left me pretty shocked. I think a good sum up of this route, and maybe even the game, is that the path to hell is built on good intentions. I could sit here all day gushing about Hinagiku and Tobari's romance, but girl, we do not have the time. So, Tobari and Hinagiku's romance is rooted in a journey of advocacy, intersectionality, and unlearning harmful mindsets as they establish a deep mutual respect and love for one another. And it's so good. There's a trope in here that a lot of people tend to dislike, but without spoiling it, I think it works, since it reveals very important things about said character's subconscious. Compared to the route I had played before, Tobari's route had a lot more moving pieces that needed ample time to see the resolution. In a similar fashion to Aoyuki, the end felt a little fast and up in the air. There's also something kind of huge that's not fully resolved here. Overall though, I'd say it's solid enough. Tobari's bad end is one for the books, everybody. It is one of the best written and most beautifully tragic bad ends I've ever seen. I'd even say the pacing beats its good end counterpart, and is probably a bit more realistic than it as well. There was this deep, creeping feeling of loss and helplessness, which slowly increased until its dramatic culmination and a heartbreaking finale for Tobari and Hinagiku. No one ever talked to me about daisies ever again. If you know, you know. Tobari is a trailblazer in every sense of the word, yet has surprisingly retained a sense of childlike wonder despite all the adversity he's been through. And trust that it's a lot, and I couldn't help but love him for that. Aoiki and Tobari are characters who complement each other since their mindsets are discovered to be a bit more similar than you would think. Thus, the routes provide different perspectives and nuances of the commoner experience in an oppressive society like Itehari, which is highlighted when played back to back. Tobari's route honestly took me by surprise. Granted, I'm a lot of a crybaby, but I found myself moved to tears a couple of times in this route. Also, Tobari's a badass with a gun and a fiery howdy. Like, okay, work? Yori's route is unique in being the only bachelor of aristocratic descent. Like in the other routes, there are incidents to get to the bottom of, but that's a little hard when you got a fake engagement with a guy you don't really like on your hands. Oh boy, where do I even begin? So, Yori was a tricky route for me really. I found the plot compelling, but suppressed in order to focus on the romance. I know that's a weird complaint considering it's an Otome game, but the context of the romance made the romantic development feel underwhelming, thus making my patience dwindle the longer it went on. It didn't really help that I felt like Hinagiku's best qualities were slowly being stripped from her for the sake of building the romantic chemistry either. After a point, I felt like the route wasn't reaching its full potential, therefore affecting my enjoyment. I was aware that my grievances with the writing, the dramatic irony primarily, were intentional narrative choices even during my playthrough, but couldn't help but still feel the same as I progressed further into the route. Then I reached the ending branch. It was dramatic and thrilling, and honestly, this is when everything finally clicked for me. I felt like I finally got out of Yori what I was waiting to see, and it was so worth it. I also liked the final state of their romance more than I had throughout the route. In retrospect, I do think the only aristocrat route taking this approach with its plot did serve as a proper allegory to Itehari's beautiful exterior, rotten interior. One could argue the aftermath of the route in the best end is too convenient for the characters involved, but in a twisted way, it perfectly embodies the kind of place Itehari is when those with unchecked privileges are the star of the show. Yori's intangible nature is polarizing to say the least, but he isn't without depth. He's arrogant, but not delusional. He's self-serving, but not reckless. Types like Yori are usually a hard sell for me since I end up finding them hard to take seriously, but I ended up being a fan overall. While he by no means ended up as my favorite character nor route, I did come to appreciate the route's writing more with its conclusion and upon more reflection. You can always count on this man to be the messiest person in the room, and I'm kind of here for it. Stay young, wild, and insufferable, Yori. Hinagiku, alongside the reluctant Sayakusa, who's all too familiar with her busybody nature, vows to make Itehari a better place after some chance and not so chance meetings. But in order to protect the future, you may need to face the past first. I can definitely see why Sayakusa and Tobari are paired together, as this route approaches similar but not entirely the same topics with a greater political emphasis. This route takes our protagonist through a whirlwind of events, and in doing so, they learned firsthand that history is written by the winners. I thought this route was a lot of food for thought. Side note, devs, why were y'all whacking Tobari here? Like, it's not even his route. Let him live. Anyways, the romance started strong and consistent, but dropped to a meander midway to favor the plot before re-emerging at the very end. So it ended up feeling just a bit one-sided on Tsukusa's side for the majority of the route. This made for an almost disjointed romantic progression that lacked a clear transition from when their love mutually went from platonic to romantic. I'm not saying these two did not have a great romantic dynamic, cause trust and believe I was rooting for them the entire time. It's very puppy love and growing pains, but with such a wild backdrop, it was quite interesting to me. The two made for a great couple, and their history was so compelling for their relationship. I just do wish the plot could have given the romance some more time to breathe, but it wasn't unforgivable to me. This was the first route of the game where I felt completely satisfied with the pacing and the outcomes of the best ending. And Tsukusa's bad end was so creative. I enjoyed how it parallels the best end, but is riddled with sacrifices that leave our protagonist grappling with the question of, was it all even worth it? Tsukusa, despite being so well learned, confines himself to a small world where it's just him, his karakuri, and Hinagiku whenever she feels like bulldozing in. He's a largely self-motivated character with an aversion to responsibility as a result of low self-esteem, so witnessing him slowly grow into himself as the route progresses was such a treat. Ever since meeting Yashiro, the peaceful and blessed land of Itehari has had strange things happening left and right, but that won't deter Hinagiku from helping this elusive amnesiac get back his memories. I may have conceded that the usage of dramatic irony was an effective enough move for what they were aiming for in Yori's route, but I don't think I can give Yashiro the same grace, unfortunately. I won't say the route was totally devoid of these things, but the delayed reveals that the player was already privy to hindered in the makings of what I think could have been a route with consistent tension and drama. This is a bit of a shame since I think Yashiro's route is probably the most interesting on paper, and wasn't even unenjoyable by any means, but the execution left something to be desired for the plot until Chapter 8. Now, what happened in Chapter 8? Well, I'm glad you asked. Against seemingly all odds, it perfectly tied everything together while keeping a thrilling pace and including phenomenal scenes for the two's relationship, Yashiro's character, and the overall implications for Itehari and its future. I extend this sentiment to the bad end version of Chapter 8 as well. I just lament at the fact that if some story beats had been condensed and later ones executed earlier on in the route, I know this route's plot could have been consistently that strong. You may be wondering, how could I have said such grievances and still have found the route enjoyable? Well, that's because when the plot wasn't plotting, the romance was by all means romancing. I am weak to the dynamic of these two. Hinagiku is as down as she can be, and Yashiro is nothing short of a sweet devil. Their romance was so cute, though it certainly had intense moments that stood out. And okay, maybe some won't see the vision here, but it was really reminiscent of Romeo and Juliet in its lightest and darkest moments. In a perfect world, I'd love the romance to have stayed the same and the plot to have been snappier for max effect. Even amongst the allies, some of Yashiro's character tropes aren't new, which I don't have an issue with in and of itself, of course. But I don't think they quite hit the mark in making some tropes personal enough to him and his route, like they did for others. It felt like the route couldn't properly explore the deeper aspects of his character because of its pacing. Even so, the route was really fun and I still love this guy to bits, be it as a character or as a love interest. Straight to the point, as the dev stated, this is a condensed route made up of 5 short chapters. So, because of its compact and short nature, it's quite volatile in pacing and tone, changing gears quickly and at any moment. In one scene, there'd be a life or death situation, and the next, we got side characters flirting with Hinagiku. Personally, I found the oddity of this route very fun. Its unpredictable nature kept me engaged the entire time. I also adored the group teamwork here. I love these sorts of situations where the allies are forced to come together. While I wouldn't say it was entirely unexpected, this route leaned full on sci-fi. I found pretty much everything as believable as I could find something sci-fi, and most things had ample foreshadowing, though some did fall a little flat, like the final baddie, who ended up feeling pretty shallow in comparison to the other villains. In addition, I liked the shocking revelations after Yashiro's route having unexpectedly few. On the topic of Yashiro, I'm a bit salty that all of the gripes I had in his route would have been completely solved if the entirety of his character's subplot here had been incorporated into his own route. So, I am pretty confused at the decision ultimately. I suppose it was to give off a feeling of, but wait, there's more! For his character, but I'm pretty torn about the decision all things considered. Anyway, back to the truth route. It was a great way to finish the game. It intertwined the past and the present to make a vow to the future, and I loved it. I thought the ending was bittersweet and beautiful, but also really feels like it teases a continuation. I'm eyeing you, LicoBiTS. Coming out of the mega hit that is Piofiore and even making their own company to boot, lots of people had high hopes for Uchronia. And, well, if you're coming in expecting another Piofiore just because it's the same team, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. I feel like Uchronia and Piofiore don't bear all that much resemblance in plot and romance, so it's best to go in with no preconceived notions unrelated to the game itself. Personally, if I hadn't known going in that this was the same team, I wouldn't have guessed it until probably the truth route. I'd say from plot to romance, the game distinguishes itself from the team's previous work. I hope you get by now that I am an absolute shooter for this game, but there are some qualms to point out that you probably picked up on by now. I don't think the build-up and the resolution were totally equal for the first routes, as noted in the route section of this video. In addition, it wasn't uncommon for Uchronia to find itself lost in the sauce. It struggled in properly balancing plot and romance the more ambitious its narrative got after its 2 starter routes, causing pacing issues in all of the locked LI routes, where either the plot or the romance had to give. On a similar note, I think the game could have paced itself a bit better in unraveling its mysteries. A lot of them are quite intertwined throughout the routes, so things are repeated quite a bit. It never reached the point of being unenjoyable for me, but if some things were going to have some overlap, the common route could have benefited from being longer to prevent such a degree of repetition. And finally, the game feels like part 1 of something bigger, which I do hope they do something with. I think the game warrants something larger than DLCs, like a full-on sequel. Generally, every route manages to fix most of its immediate conflicts by its conclusion, but I don't feel like I can say the story had truly met its end every time I finished a route. There was just something missing. All of the endings contemplate what the future holds for our cast and come off as a happily ever after, for now. While I'd love and dare say I need to see more romance and fluffy moments of Hinagiku and her man of the hour, I equally need to see the manifestation of this future the game so hopefully looks upon. But I'd like to add that none of this stopped Uchronia from being an amazing game for me, starting with something more aesthetic. I love the usage of Live 2D. It added so much to my immersion. Not only does it look mega cool, it adds another layer to the storytelling by utilizing body language in relevant scenes. Like, if a character is lying, then they might frown and look to the side before looking back to the audience with a smile. It's really small, but I loved it. Moving on, though widening the scope of the setting could have strengthened the nuance of its commentary, Uchronia excels in relaying a story about a land that was made on people's hopes for a better life that slowly became what it aimed to escape. Like I said before, the path to hell is built on good intentions. The entire game is a gradual contention and dissection of the black and white truths we and the characters were taught about this world. Some of the game's best moments are its paralleling scenes that allow the player to reflect on their journey thus far, and this comes at random times and in varying subtlety. While the concept of picture-perfect reality isn't so picture-perfect after all isn't entirely original, I think it's important to focus on an individual text execution of a tried idea, since ultimately, every idea has been done before, and all stories are rooted in tropes. As discussed before, while not every trope and literary device Uchronia utilized always hit, I think it's still fair to say most of the time they worked in the game's favor in creating a grandiose and unique tale with impactful messages. And, despite the whole cogs in a machine imagery this game loves to use, none of these characters ever felt like mere vessels for the story. The life and synergy of this cast is off the charts. No matter my thoughts on an Li's route, each character had at least one scene in their route that elevated their writing. In addition, I was pleasantly surprised that after sometimes feeling like a villain could have used more depth, another route would build on their motives and character. Nearly every character, including the extended cast, brought valuable contributions to how the world functions and ultimately confines them all in different functions and in different ways. However, the character that takes the cake is Hinagiku. This noble girl was quite the protagonist, ending up as my favorite character in the game. Sorry boys, and here's why. Ultimately, the perfect utopia that is Itehari doesn't exist. Conflict is in human nature, and in attempting to be one, it closed its eyes to its changing society to cling onto a concept. Hinagiku is the embodiment of what Itehari was founded on, a pure and naive optimism. While this doubles as her strength and weakness throughout the game as it did for Itehari, Hinagiku also carries a trait that Itehari lacks, a refusal to complacency. Even in situations that don't involve her, she never accepts things as they are. And while change is brought by more than just optimism, Hinagiku is fully aware and tries to actively right wrongs with her position of power and influence, even if she goes in a little over her head in the process. Furthermore, Hinagiku is not without her own struggles, even in those unrelated to the death of her parents. As a young woman in a position of power, she carries privilege unknown to many in Itehari. Yet still, her skills and character are doubted by her predominantly male peers, an existence often reduced to the sanctity of her reputation as an unwedded noble girl, even by her suitors at times. Sexism is never as overt of a theme as other oppressions taking place, but it's tangible enough across the routes to easily pick up that it's intentionally there, and something Hinagiku is constantly working against, as a young woman willingly concerning herself in worlds run by men. In some of these situations, Hinagiku clearly makes a point to fight back, but in others, she finds herself unable to. The acknowledgement of the intersectionality of her identities, which give her unique privileges and oppressions, help make her just as compelling of a character as her allies, if not even more. Utakata no Uchronia is plenty worth the experience for its world, commentary, and characters, despite fumbling the details sometimes. It doesn't always quite nail balancing romance and plot, but I think the overall end product is memorable and thought-provoking enough to overlook it. And hopefully it's not too big of an ask to hope to see a full-length continuation of all their stories sometime down the line. Thank you so much for watching the first installment of Otome Rambles and my first ever YouTube video. I've only made these sorts of videos a couple times before in like a 2-minute format, so this was my first time making a full-length video. I hope you had fun watching even though I'm still trying to find my footing with everything. If you have some money to spare and would like to support me in making more videos, I have a Ko-fi where you can do so. And if not, no worries, just watching my videos and spreading the word is more than enough. In the meanwhile, I hope you look forward to the next Otome Rambles, whenever that may be. Hint hint, it's probably another Japanese release from this year. Bye bye!